I'm the chair of Medfield Energy Committee. The webinar is being recorded. And I just want to say this is the kickoff event to the planning process. We're calling it Climate, the Problem, the Path, and a Plan for Medfield. So even though the Medfield Energy Committee and Medfield Environment Action have been working hard in the last 2 years on public outreach, we view this as the real start of the planning process for net zero in Medfield, now that we've achieved passage at the recent town meeting of the Warrant article to embark on the process. So we're looking to chart that path between now and next March, and we're looking for input and engagement from any and all Medfielders. So welcome everybody for being to this event tonight. Thanks for being here. And I want you to be considering as we go through the program tonight, the past, the present, and the future. We're here today. We usually think of the past as most connected to today, and it makes sense, we're humans. But pretty soon, today is going to be tomorrow. And what I mean by that is in a year or few, people will be asking about us today, why didn't they know, why didn't they change, why were they still burning fossil fuels in 2021? So there's a challenge for you. We're going to lay it all out tonight. Again, thank you all for being here, and Hilly is here to take it away and start the program.
With my audio, yes. Thank you so much, Fred. I hope you can see my slides up. Welcome to this webinar, and we have a number of invited speakers today. Jim Nail is going to introduce us to the problem of climate change, and then we have Hong Ha Chu from the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs, who's going to present the Massachusetts law and plan for climate change. We have a slight change in the agenda here. I'm going to talk, and Jim, we're going to talk about the plan for Medfield, and Ken Pruitt, the energy manager for the town of Arlington, is going to close us out before we launch into questions and answers at the end. So I'm welcoming Jim first to talk about the climate change problem.
Great, thanks. Great, thanks very much, Hilly. Welcome, everybody. Delighted to be here. Well, actually not delighted. Who is delighted to talk about climate change? But I'm glad you are all here so we can work together to address the problem of climate change. Do I have the ability to advance slides, or Hilly, are you going to advance slides for me? There we go. Climate change can be very complicated and get very technical and be very hard to explain, but I like this construct that the Yale Project on Climate Communication Change Communications came up with. So I'm going to follow this, and it's great just to, get it all clear in our heads. And then if you're talking to other people who don't know that much about it, I think it's also a good structure to use. So climate change, it's real. It's bad. It's us. Scientists agree, and there is hope. Next slide, please. So it's real. Back the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has been studying this issue for decades. And in 2013, they issued this high-level statement that warming of the climate system is unequivocal. And since the 1950s, many of the observed changes are unprecedented over decades to millennia. So very clear statement, it is real. Next, please. And the evidence that then supports that statement is, of course, this is a chart of the concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere from NASA, actually. Sorry, I don't have the source there. The NASA climate change site. And as you can see, they show that yes, carbon dioxide levels have fluctuated over the last 800,000 years, but never been above that particular line of about 300 parts per million. And then you can see at the end during our lifetimes, the pattern has been broken, and the concentration has just skyrocketed, something that has never been seen, as they said, in millennia. Next slide, please. And along with that, because carbon dioxide traps heat in the atmosphere, it kind of acts like a blanket in the atmosphere. Along with that has driven up temperatures since the 1950s, and you can see it accelerating in the 70s and 80s to the level that we're dealing with today. Next slide, please. And those rising temperatures are bad. They create a lot of bad effects. Stronger storms, higher sea levels, which in the upper left-hand corner are affecting right now places like the Cape that are near the ocean. I was just hearing a story on the radio this afternoon that a weather station on Monomoy Island in Chatham has to be deconstructed and moved because of sea level rise and storms eating away at the bluff that it has been situated on for many, many years. Heat and drought, we are still in a drought here in Massachusetts. And, you know, this story from last fall talks about how, you know, the last year or so has just not been normal. And we hear the stories about out west already having 100+ degree heat before summer officially starts. And, you know, some of the more subtle effects, but, you know, ultimately incredibly important, are this press release that talks about the ocean acidification, which comes along with the increasing carbon dioxide concentration in the atmosphere, that threatens the shellfish industry in Massachusetts. And those of us who love lobster and steamers and things like that, you know, it's terrible for us, but also, you know, it potentially impacts a very big industry in New England. Next, please. And it is us. Again, the IPCC report in 2013, not only did they state that the change is unequivocal, but human influence on the climate system is clear, evident from those increasing greenhouse gas concentrations we talked about and other things that they detail in the report. Now, some people push back on that and say, well, you know, again, carbon dioxide levels have changed in the past. Maybe this is just a normal thing that we shouldn't get so worried about. When you start looking at the natural sources of carbon dioxide on the left, the biggest one are volcanoes. And the highest scientific estimate of how much carbon dioxide volcanoes put into the atmosphere is 500 million tons a year. Sounds like a lot, but the burning of fossil fuels puts 40 billion tons of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Obviously, far bigger, overshadowing what those natural sources are. And so it clearly is about the effect humans are having on the atmosphere. Next, please. And it's something that people are becoming more and more convinced of. Again, the Yale Climate Change Communication Center, along with George Mason University, has done a long-running set of surveys among consumers. And you can see over the last dozen years or so that there has been an increase in recognition that not only is climate change real, it is human-caused. Next. And scientists agree. You know, there is a camp that says, no, there isn't scientific consensus. Scientists are still debating things. Well, of course, scientists do debate. That's what they do. But 97% of scientific papers acknowledge that climate change is real. And back to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, it's a United Nations body that was formed in the late 80s. So it's been working on this issue for 33 years. Working with 195 member countries, tapping scientists around the world, thousands of scientists, reviewing thousands, if not tens of thousands of papers to find the best science, the best data, and distill that into the reports that they've issued, so that there is a really solid body of evidence that has been through a very structured, transparent process of submission, review, debate, writing the report, getting input from the scientific community, revising based on that input, and then finally being accepted by the full group. And that work earned a 2007 Nobel Prize because it is just so important and so good. But it's also every other scientific group that you can see that has issued statements saying that they accept the science, they believe climate change is real. The American Academy of Science, the American Chemical Society, the American Geophysical Union, you can see them all there. So scientists do agree. There is no debate on the core question of whether it's real and whether it's bad. Obviously, they will debate the details, the timing, things like that. That's what science does. So this all sounds, oh, okay. And again, back to our friends at Yale and George Mason. From that survey, they also asked this question about scientific consensus. And again, people are realizing that debate is over and understanding that no, there is a scientific consensus about this. That all sounds very depressing, doesn't it? But there is hope. And I will start here in Massachusetts with the Global Warming Solutions Act, which the legislature enacted in 2008, and set this goal to reduce carbon emissions in the state by 25% by 2020. At the time of 2008, people were like, oh my goodness, how the heck are we going to do that? That's huge. Well, we did it. Now, this was kind of the easy stuff in some ways. Most of the effect here was from closing down coal-fired and oil-fired power plants. You have some increase in solar, little bit of wind, things like that. But most of it, we didn't really even, those of us general, average, everyday people didn't really notice that much. But now it's our turn. In order to get to the next goal that the legislature just passed this spring, that I know Han's going to talk about in a couple of minutes, it's going to take effort by more of us, by all of us, and thinking very carefully about decisions we make, purchases that we make in the coming years of various products and things to find the lowest carbon alternative. But there is great technologies, new technologies coming that will help us. Next slide, please. Of course, we're going to get more and more solar. Solar continues to become more cost-effective, more common all the time. And wind power, we're about to start a big growth of offshore wind power. You can see here parcels of the Sound and parcels of the ocean off the East Coast here that are being licensed for solar, for wind farms. So over the coming years, we'll see more and more of those leases be acquired, get permitted, and start to build. And I believe like Vineyard Wind is one of the most advanced in that process. So that's great. Beyond that, for our homes, heat pump technology is become really the go-to technology now for heating. And it sounds very exotic and new, but it's something that's been used in Europe and Asia for years and years. And we're just beginning to get it here in New England. And we've talked about that on other programs before. But also electric cars are really accelerating. It's no longer just Tesla with their $75,000, $80,000, $100,000 cars. GM has committed to electrifying their entire product line by 2035. Volkswagen has launched a very aggressive product, the first electric SUV for everyone, kind of going straight at Elon Musk there, I think, in their marketing. And then the upper right there is the Ford F-150 Lightning. That's the electric F-150, one of the most popular vehicles in America. And the last article I read, so they've got 100,000 pre-orders for that vehicle. So we will have the opportunity in the coming years to participate very actively in lowering the carbon emissions of the state. on the Energy Committee and Medfield Energy Action. This will be something we'll be helping you understand and move forward in going into the future. So with that, Han, let me turn it over to you. Give us some more detail about the new climate legislation.
Thank you, Fred, for that setup. I'm sharing my screen. All right. Thank you again for the opportunity to present on the state's clean energy and climate plans with you all today. I'm the Global Warming Solutions Program Manager for the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs, and a large part of my work at EEA is managing the process to develop these clean energy and climate plans, which includes coordinating with state agencies across EEA and other secretariats, and engaging with the Global Warming Solutions Act Implementation Advisory Committee members and other stakeholders. I'm lucky to live, and you all, I hope, are lucky to live in a state where there's general alignment between both branches of government on climate policies. And because of that, Massachusetts has created a strong framework of state laws, regulations, and executive orders. Major ones are listed here on the slide that guides the Commonwealth's actions and to address climate change. The passage of the Global Warming Solutions Act in 2008 positioned Massachusetts to be among the leading states tackling global climate change. It required Mass DEP, Department of Environmental Protection, to establish a statewide greenhouse gas inventory. It authorized the Secretary of EEA to set legally binding greenhouse gas emissions limits for each decade, and it requires EEA to develop plans, these clean energy and climate plans, to achieve each interim emissions limit. The Next Generation Roadmap Act that Governor Baker recently signed into law updated some of the Global Warming Solutions Act requirements and provided additional tools for the Commonwealth to decarbonize equitably. It codified the target of net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050 that the governor committed to last year during his State of the Commonwealth address. And it specified that the 2030 and 2040 emissions limits must be at least 50% and 75% respectively below the 1990 baseline, defined environmental justice populations in the states. It codified defined and codified the definition of environmental justice populations in state statute, and included climate change in the definition of environmental burden for key permit reviews. It requires outreach and engagement with environmental justice populations, and it allows DOER to establish a new opt-in net zero stretch energy building code, and it also set statewide appliance efficiency standards for 17 residential and commercial products. There's a lot. I can go down this list, but I highlight here on the right-hand side of the slide other important elements, provisions of this legislation. But the main point is that this legislation has been great because it provides a lot of the tools for policymakers to tackle climate change. And the framework, and so with the tools at our disposal and the legal framework, we are definitely developing greenhouse gas emissions reduction plans that utilize all of this authorities, and it's built, and we built a lot of the clean energy and climate planning process on these 4 pillars. The first one being 4 pillars of decarbonization. So first one being transitioning buildings and vehicles and other end uses away from consuming fossil fuels. The second one being aggressively pursuing energy efficiency and flexibility to enable cost-effective decarbonization. And the third one is producing zero and low carbon energy supplies to power our energy system. To reach net zero, though, we must also pursue the fourth strategy, which is sequestering carbon to offset the residual emissions in 2050. So we base our clean energy and climate plans on these four overarching pillars to develop an integrated policy portfolios to achieve greenhouse gas emissions. And in December of last year, we released the 2050 roadmap, which synthesizes the results of a comprehensive long-range analysis of cost-effective and equitable pathways to achieving net zero by 2050. That roadmap focuses on key no-regret strategies for us to achieve net zero emissions. Coupled with the release of that roadmap is the interim Clean Energy and Climate Plan for 2030, which details specific strategies, policies, and actions that the Commonwealth will pursue to reduce 45 emissions reduction by 2030. And that interim plan was very much informed by the long-range analysis for the 2050 roadmap. And during the 3-month public comment period on this interim plan, we received over 1,000 public comments from citizens, environmental organizations, businesses, industry and labor groups, municipalities, legislators. Many of these comments are very constructive, and we're going to use the time allowed by the Next Generation Roadmap Act to incorporate the feedback and the suggestions from these comments to inform the final Clean Energy and Climate Plan for 2025 and 2030, which will be complying with the new legislation to achieve at least 50% emissions reduction by 2030. And so this new plan will be released by July 1 of next year. During this process, as part of this process, we will have public meetings in this fall on the 2025 and 2030 emissions limits, sublimits, and carbon sequestration baseline and goals. And in the upcoming winter, we will have public meetings on the proposed interim emissions reduction targets and the proposed carbon sequestration goals for 2025 and 2030, as well as the proposed plan to achieve these targets and goals. And by the end of next year, so that's by January 1 of 2023, we will release, as required by the climate legislation, the Clean Energy and Climate Plan for 2050. So exciting times for a lot of climate planners and a lot of climate work is ahead of us. But I look forward to engaging with you all and with other municipalities and other stakeholders throughout this process. And I will now spend a couple more minutes to summarize the greenhouse gas reduction measures that were detailed in our interim plan. So a lot of words in the next couple of slides, but I'll just summarize that the main strategy for us to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in the building sector to get about 9 million metric tons reduction is tackling, like I said earlier, new construction via the opt-in specialized building energy code. And then for existing policies, we will be pivoting the Mass Save program to phase out incentives for fossil fuel, phase out incentives for fossil fuel heating systems, and increase incentives for heat pumps and other non-emitting, zero-emitting heating and cooling technologies. And more importantly, we are going to cap the building sector, emissions for the building sector through a process of convening the clean heat, establishing and convening the Clean Heat Commission and an interagency task force, and they will help us next year and the following year to figure out what's the level to set the cap, as well as what's the framework to design the cap. For transportation, we're aiming to reduce at least 8 million metric tons reduction here, and to get to 50%, I think we're going to try to push even more from the transportation sector. So main measures for us to get this large amount of greenhouse gas reduction is through various policies here, like, for example, the Transportation and Climate Initiative Program, which will provide the funding necessary to really transform our transportation infrastructure and make it cleaner and less emitting, as well as providing the needed benefits to EJ communities who have bore a lot of the disproportionate burden from the transportation emissions. Besides TCIP, we are, implementing, we're adopting a lot of the California regulations to make sure that new vehicle sales in Massachusetts are going to be zero emitting vehicles, such as electric vehicles that Jim talked about earlier, and not just light duty vehicles, but also trucks. So we'll be, once the California Advanced Clean Truck and Fleets regulations are done, we'll be adopting that. And we will also, pursue incentive programs to make sure that everyone, not just those who can afford, like who have high income, can afford zero emitting vehicles and have access to transportation, clean transportation. In addition to addressing the vehicle side, we'll be addressing the fuels side. We're going to explore having a regional or multi-state low carbon fuel standard to decrease the carbon intensity of diesel. This will address greenhouse gas emissions from trucks mostly. And we will also try to pursue, policies that reduce vehicle miles traveled, reduce the reliance of personal vehicles, and increase the walkability of our communities. I'll try to finish up because it's I probably exceeded my time here. So for electricity, our main strategy is to continue to procure clean and renewable energy as we have set out to do. So keeping those procurements on time, and we will plan to have 2 more gigs of distributed energy generation from 2025 to 2030, and plan for 6 more gig of offshore wind between 2030 and 2040. For non-energy, continue to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from use of short-lived climate pollutants like HFCs, and then best practices to reduce emissions from wastewater, waste, agricultural emissions. For land, this is a big area for us to explore on how we can absorb the residual emissions in the atmosphere in 2050. And so we are working really hard to figure out what is the accounting framework in a net zero, in a net emissions framework, and explore incentives for us to protect our lands and better manage them for carbon sequestration. And that's it. Anyone, I can't stay for our Q&A session today, but here's my email. Feel free to email me, contact me here if you have any questions. And thank you again for having me.
Thank you.
That was terrific. Thank you very much. I just want to interject, Tilly, before you go on, that if anyone does have questions, they're welcome to put them into it's not a chat, but it's a Q&A. And in this setup, the panelists can all see the Q&A, and I think many of you are already panelists, so it'll be sort of like a chat. And then we will have time for Q&A live at the end. Correct, Tilly?
That's correct, yes.
Okay, thank you.
To clarify, panelists can't write into the Q&A, so just, I guess, raise your hand. Sorry.
Oh, whoops.
That's good to know.
Yeah.
All right, so thank you so much, Anne. That was really interesting. And I'm going to take it from here. So you have clearly outlined that the the state is making all sorts of provisions for municipalities and residents to encourage them to reduce their greenhouse gas footprint. And as Jim pointed out earlier, the state has also done the hard work of starting to decarbonize the electrical grid so that we can use the electrification of our energy uses to have a lower carbon footprint. So let's talk about what's happening in Medfield. This spring, the Medfield Energy Committee sponsored a warrant article, which really was a resolution affirming the net zero goal for 2050 for Medfield. I have here the wording of the warrant article, and I've highlighted the core areas that I want to touch upon today. The first one is that we're looking at eliminating the greenhouse gas emissions that are originating in the town by 2050. And there's a charge to develop a net zero action plan that outlines specific strategies and sets measurable, attainable, and realistic interim targets for Medfield. So we're taking what the state is doing to our own level, and we're planning to do our bit to help the state reach the 2050 goal. At town meeting, Medfield residents overwhelmingly supported the net zero goal and plan and creating an action plan. So the Medfield Energy Committee, as the sponsor of the article, is taking now the lead in taking the next step after setting the goal, which is developing the climate action plan for Medfield. The guiding principles that we are trying to apply is that we want to help residents make the transition as seamless as possible. That means whenever you come to a natural transition point where you need to replace the heat, your furnace or a car, that you can then make a smart choice and get a more efficient, low carbon alternative. In the process of writing the action plan, we want to encourage residents to be part of the process. We want everybody to be able to voice their concerns. We want to get everybody's input and create a dialogue with the residents and also with the businesses and with the town administration. And the purpose of the plan really is going to be to create a support system to help residents understand what the priorities are, what their options are, and how they can choose lower emission technologies going forward that Jim already talked about. As a result, the Medfield Energy Committee is in the process of assembling a climate action work group, which we called the TOMCAP for the moment, Town of Medfield Climate Action Plan. I hope you like that. And it's a subcommittee for the moment of the Medfield Energy Committee, and will or already includes town officials like Nick, Selectman Peterson, and where we have invited some residents and representatives of town organizations to work with us. Some of these members will be attending regular meetings, and other groups will be consulted for their input in specific events. As this, just similar to what you just heard from Han, public outreach and the input from the public is a major core issue of what we've trying to achieve. We want to hear from everybody. We want people to get engaged and then be involved. And that is going to be a major part of our work. We're also going to work with town officials and departments, and not only in collaboration with them, but we are also counting on their support following the vote at town meeting. In addition, there's a rich reservoir of regional resources that we're going to tap. Some regional organizations that whose purpose is to support municipalities in their energy planning, but also we're going to work with other town sustainability and energy managers like Ken, who's going to speak later, who have a lot of experience and whose work we can use to inform our work. I'm so sorry. So the first step that we're going to have to do is to create an inventory of the town-wide emissions. You remember from the warrant article is that we're going to only look at town-wide emissions and not emissions outside that originate outside town, and that will then inform the major sources, but also the priority actions that we need to take in town. So before we go and launch into the Medfield inventory, let's talk about, think about what greenhouse gases are and how to measure them. So you've heard earlier from Jim and Han that carbon dioxide from fossil fuels is a major contributor, but there's also methane and nitrous oxide that come from human activities. Some of them also come from natural activities, but I think it's well established that a lot of what we're talking about here is human generated greenhouse gases. In order to measure their warming effect, the warming effect of methane and nitrous oxide for the purpose of measurements is then converted into a CO2 equivalent. And you saw that in some of Han's slides. It's called CO2e, which allows for all of these gases to be measured together. The F gases here are fluoridated hydrocarbons, and they really don't play a large role in Massachusetts. Most of them are generated in industrial settings that really don't play a large role in our state. So the other way to think about your carbon footprint is your personal carbon footprint. Where do you generate carbon emissions? And this is a sort of an average American's carbon emissions. You can see there are 5 large areas: transportation, food, home heating and cooling, other home energy uses such as lighting and your washing machine and your, computers and whatever, and then all the stuff you buy. Now, a lot of this is generated in town, in your location. A lot of your transportation, your car, your home heating and cooling, your home energy use, all that is local emissions. Food, not so much, because your food mostly is grown elsewhere, and the energy that is growing into growing the food, processing it, transporting it, those emissions are not originating in town. And the same goes for the stuff you buy. Most of the stuff you buy is manufactured elsewhere, then transported here. And those 2 areas would show up in the local emissions mostly as the waste we generate and the wastewater we generate. So that's just to clarify what would go into a local inventory. If you're interested in measuring your own carbon footprint, and we do encourage you to think about this, because we're not going to talk about the food you eat or the stuff you buy in our inventory specifically, but those are obviously big areas that contribute to your carbon footprint. And you might want to do a personal carbon footprint, and you can do that. There's a calculator that the EPA has put out, and you can Google other sites that allow you to calculate your own carbon footprint and think about your choices. But as I said, we want to talk about transportation and housing mostly, and waste. And I just want to state the obvious: most of the transportation that happens in America is motor vehicles, and only some of it is air and other transportation. And those obviously, airplanes and most national railroads and that sort of thing also do not contribute to our local inventory. So how does this work? What is a greenhouse gas inventory, and why do we need them? We are working with the Metropolitan Area Planning Council. They have generated a greenhouse gas emission tool, an inventory tool, specifically for towns and cities in Massachusetts that is designed to, let me read this. The primary goal of this tool is to simplify the process of developing a greenhouse gas inventory by using publicly available data sets while maintaining high levels of accuracy and relevancy in the data used. The goal is to streamline the process for Massachusetts cities and towns to create local greenhouse gas inventories. So the tool is based on international standards, so it's very robust and sound. It is supposed to support climate planning for the towns and cities in Massachusetts. And it helps the towns establish a baseline. Say 1 year we have that sort of, that level of greenhouse gas emissions, and it allows to set reduction targets, say in 5 or 10 years, and then to go back and track the performance over time. It also ensures that there's consistent measurements between towns and years so that we can compare our emissions, say, with Arlington or Natick or other towns that have used this tool. And also allows the greenhouse gas emissions that are measured in the inventory to be aggregated regional or even nationally, so we can see how we make progress all together. And most importantly, this greenhouse gas inventory demonstrates the important roles that cities and towns play in tackling climate change and facilitate the insight through benchmarking and aggregation of comparable data. That means we really have to take action to make all of Massachusetts reach their goal. So what are the sectors that are included in this tool? The first one is stationary energy. Those are the buildings, residential buildings, obviously, but also the municipal buildings and industrial commercial buildings. There's transportation, mostly on-road vehicles. Railways, we don't have really railways in Medfield. The railway that goes through town is a national railway, and that does not count towards emissions in town. And finally, there's waste in the form of solid waste and wastewater. And this is what we came up with using this tool. You can see the clear winners are passenger vehicles and residential buildings. So I don't want to go through this very much, but you can see that about 80% of our emissions in town come from these two sources. And I would like to open this up right now for questions, so I don't have to go back. If somebody wants to make a comment here, I'd be happy to entertain a comment. Maybe not. So based on this.
So I'll pipe in, Hilly.
Yeah.
So just to be clear, if you could go back. So this is the picture of Medfield, correct?
This is the picture of Medfield that we can measure. Yes.
And you may have other slides, but this is it. There aren't others.
There's no other slide that I have right now for the inventory.
When Jim told us earlier, this is us. This is us.
This is us.
Okay, thank you.
So obviously we want to tackle all of these areas, but we also want to get the biggest bang for the buck. And we all know that we need to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions as soon as possible and as much as possible. Anything we accomplish this year or next year is also not emitting anything the year after and the year after. So the sooner we act, the more impact it will have. And so we need to focus on what makes the biggest impact and is technically, economically practical. And we heard earlier from Jim that technically we have heating and cooling for housing available that is supported by the state. And there's many electric car choices that are happening. And, economically practical, it's becoming increasingly economically practical. So the strategies are to reduce the energy use, which would reduce, so insulating houses, for example. We're greening the grid. The other warrant article that we passed at town meeting was the community choice aggregation, which will hopefully in a year or two bring more green energy to Medfield and as a bulk purchase. We're going to work on electrifying all our energy uses and reduce combustion. And as I said earlier, we're going to work to inform the public so that everybody can make those choices at the natural replacement points in the lifetime of the equipment. So in terms of action planning, we have made a rough plan to reach our goal to have an action plan by next winter. And we have achieved phase 1, which is to set the goal and get the community-wide support. We have already done some community outreach, which is what we're doing also tonight. Started strategic planning and talked to the town for their support. And as you have just seen, we have determined the priority emission sources, which are transportation and housing. And we will be working this month also to create a point of contact for the public. For the moment, if you have any comments or questions, we encourage you to get in touch with the MEA, and I'll give you the email in a minute. Over the next few months, please look out for more community outreach, and we are going to work with the public. We're going to work with businesses and organizations. We're going to tap our regional network and work with the town administration and departments to make sure everybody is thinking about how to get to the goal and know that there's support out there. Our big goal is in September 25th, the Medfield Day, to make a splash there, and then alternate between writing drafts and public input. So we need you to be part of this process and get in touch. Here's the email that I was talking about for the moment. I'm hoping that we can also generate a landing website and an email for the Medfield Energy Committee, and watch out for future events and announcements from us.
Hilly, I'm glad you mentioned Medfield Day. Are we asking for volunteers for people who might be interested in helping staff the booth?
We are asking for volunteers left and right. So, indeed. So that's where we are in Medfield. We hope we can get you on board, whether you're interested in energy or not. We need everybody to pipe up, and we'd be happy to listen to you and sit down with you. So now I'm going to introduce Ken Pruitt, who is the energy manager from the town of Arlington. And Arlington is a little ahead of us since you have already created an action plan, and we love to hear from you to hear your experience with that.
Thanks so much, Hilly. I will share a slide deck. Just give me a moment. Okay, great, thanks. So Ken Pruitt, Energy Manager for the town of Arlington. I've been in this position since 2017, and it's a great job. So let's talk a little bit about Arlington's net zero commitment. How did we come to it? Well, in January of 2018, our select board, not our town meeting, so you're ahead of us on that point, but our select board declared that our town would have as a goal to reach net zero emissions of greenhouse gases by 2050. I just want to point out that this commitment and our net zero action plan that I'll be describing, it just involves climate mitigation, in other words, a reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. It does not include preparing for the impacts of climate change, aka adaptation or mitigate or resilience. And net zero means reduce greenhouse gas emissions as far as you can, and then offset the rest with tree planting and other methods to remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. So also in 2018, the select board created the Clean Energy Future Committee, charged with leading the town to net zero by 2050. It's a picture of us when we used to meet in person, although we will again shortly. And there's 15 members, which is important. Includes our town manager, includes a member of our select board, includes representatives from business, environmentalists, and others. So we undertook a net zero project to produce the plan that I'm here to tell you about tonight. We got funding from the state to produce it. That helped pay for technical support from the Metropolitan Area Planning Council. MAPC worked with Arlington, Natick, and Melrose to help us, all three of us, produce plans sort of on the same format at the same time, so economies of scale. And it also included funding for MAPC to develop its own net zero playbook, which is essentially a handbook that any town can use for free to create their own net zero plan. We began work in the late spring of 2019 and just finished it February 26th of this year. It did include a greenhouse gas inventory. We used MAPC's tool, the same one that Hilly just told you about. So the cost to us was negligible for producing an inventory. It can often cost tens of thousands of dollars to do so. Our inventory, not surprisingly, Medfield is similar. Most communities in Massachusetts, except for the big cities, are going to be this way. It's buildings and transportation. That's where the greenhouse gas emissions are coming from in Arlington. And I have to minimize this little window so I can actually see my entire screen. It's residential buildings and passenger vehicles that are really the drivers of greenhouse gas emissions in Arlington. So our net zero action plan that we just released, here's what it included. We started with a letter from the future. It's a 2-page letter from a fictitious resident in 2050, basically thanking us for doing a great job and pointing out that we made it and the town's better for it. It's fun. It's nice to have sort of a fun, inspirational, a little bit artistic component to what can otherwise be a very dry topic. It included a section called Getting to Net Zero, which had sort of the background of net zero efforts in town and the overall goal. Contain a roadmap which I'll get to later. Those are the actual measures, the greenhouse gas mitigation measures to get us to net zero. And then we included implementation tables at the end in an appendix, essentially a big cheat sheet so that we could keep track of how we're doing on our individual measures without having to read the whole plan again. So I mentioned the roadmap. We're looking to get to net zero by taking action in 3 areas: buildings, transportation or mobility, and our energy supply. We think that this is going to get us on a path to net zero, but we have to be honest, we're not going to get there simply by implementing these 31 measures in the plan. It's going to get us on the path, but we're going to need some changes in technology, at least state laws, if not changes in federal laws, additional funding sources for people. And we just wanted to be upfront about that this is a hard thing to do. And we're headed in the right direction, but it's going to take updates of this plan probably every 5 years all the way to 2050. So actually, much like the state's approach, much like Medfield's approach as described by Hilly, we're all kind of in the same place. How are we going to get there? Make buildings really efficient, no drafty air leaks, and pretty good insulation. Stop burning fossil fuels in town, make everything electric, heating, cooking, and transportation, and then supply that electricity with renewable energy from the grid. And so if the only energy you're essentially using in a community is electricity, and that electricity is not emitting greenhouse gases, you've made it. You're going to get to net zero, and that's what we're aiming for here. And I won't go over what some of these acronyms and jargon is at the bottom because in the interest of time. So of the 31 greenhouse gas mitigation measures in our plan, most of them are in buildings, 17, 9 in mobility, 5 in energy supply. That just kind of matches up interestingly and appropriately with where our emissions are coming from. They're coming mostly from buildings, followed by transportation. And I'm not going to read through this. I'm just going to flash the screens of each section's greenhouse gas mitigation measures. So these are the building measures. We have high priority measures and then regular priority measures. I originally labeled them low or low priority, and then the people who had suggested these measures got very upset, so they just became priority. And so I will just point out this first measure, electrify buildings through an Electrify Arlington campaign. That we think is the single most important thing we can do. We've started work on it. It is to create an informational campaign with an accompanying website and trained coaches to help sort of hold homeowners and business owners' hands through the process of moving away from fossil fuels and heating exclusively with electricity and moving to electric vehicles, even better to walk and bike. So that's, if we do nothing else than the Electrify Arlington campaign and we do it well out of all of our buildings measures, we'll have done quite a bit. For mobility, a lot of different things here that I won't go through. I'll just leave this up long enough that viewers at home can pause their screen if they want to watch this, read through this list. And finally, clean energy supply. Those measures are pushing the state to clean the state energy supply so that we're all getting cleaner electricity, but also this CCA is community choice aggregation. It's our local green aggregation program, and we're going to move that up to 100% renewables by 2030 for everybody in the program, which is basically everybody in town. We did quite a bit of stakeholder outreach. This can't be just a plan for our Clean Energy Future Committee to believe in. Everyone needs to be a part of this. So we did a survey in June 2020. Everything, of course, had to be online. We did have almost 700 participants. It was good to see because it's good to have that level of participation because, you know, there are naysayers for this type of thing in any town, but overwhelming support for action to eliminate greenhouse gas emissions in town. That came through loud and clear, as it did when we ran a net zero virtual open house online in November of 2020. You know, participants essentially just endorsed everything we were trying to do and said, do it faster. And then, of course, we did, you know, presentations as you are doing in Medfield to lots of different groups. Yeah, of course, you have to get the public behind you. You have to get town departments, boards, and commissions. Everyone's got to feel informed and to be supportive of a plan of this magnitude. Just to point out very quickly, as I mentioned, MAPC developed online resources so that anyone can create their own net zero plan. I know Hilly and Jim and others in Medfield are already aware of this, so I'm just going to flash this through. Don't feel like you have to reinvent the wheel. Copy, you know, feel free to copy Arlington's net zero plan, go into MAPC's net zero playbook, grab all the greenhouse gas mitigation measures you think make sense, pull them into your plan. You know, that's the whole point of doing this multi-community set of resources that Arlington, Natick, and Melrose piloted. And we have already mentioned the inventory tool. So finally, some takeaways. You can do this. We did it on a shoestring budget with some support from MAPC, not a tremendous amount. We really did it kind of in-house. Could we have done a better job with a $100,000 consultant? Maybe, but we didn't have that. And people are very excited about our plan, and I think we have the right measures in it. I won't try to ram these down your throat, but it seems like from Healy's presentation, you're really looking at the same things. You know, it's building efficiency, electrification of building and transportations, you know, giving people better options than driving single occupant vehicles, and making sure that the electricity being used in town comes from clean sources. And get community buy-in. Take the time, do the hard outreach, make those phone calls, take people to have coffee with people, do presentations, tirelessly answer the hundreds and hundreds of questions you'll get. It's all worth it in the end. And that's it. I'll stop there. And in fact, I'll even stop sharing at this point. Happy to answer questions.
That was
okay.
That was terrific. I thank you, Ken, and I thank Hilly, and I thank Jim and Han, I think had to go. Great presentations all around. This is a great opportunity for folks to speak up and ask questions of our speakers on anything that's been discussed so far, or any thoughts you have. I will keep asking, I will start and keep asking questions if others don't, but we have some already. Okay, Mark, I see you already.
Thanks, Ken. Great presentation, and Hilly and Han too. I was just wondering, is there anyone from the Medfield Building Department, Planning Board, or Zoning Board of Appeals that are on the Medfield Energy Committee or somehow involved?
Right, is that,
So,
can you
go
ask
ahead,
me?
Hilly.
No, I don't know, but I don't know if anybody is on the board, but these are definitely people we will reach out to. That's very important to have them on board. But Fred, do you have any input?
No, I don't know. I don't know of any overlap with those committees at this time, but we're open.
I just noticed when Ken made his presentation that the town manager was on the Arlington Energy Committee, and it seems like to have key people, key stakeholders on board early on, they feel like they were sort of part of the plan. They might have more buy-in later on. It's just a
Good
question.
No, that's good. And I was thinking in terms of overlap with other committees. We do have a member of the Warrant Committee who's ostensibly on the Energy Committee. We do have Amy Colleran, who's the town facilities manager. She's a member of the Medfield Energy Committee. And Nick Milano, who's on this call, is the assistant town manager, and he'll be working on this very planning process. So, and we're, as I said, as we all are saying, this is the kickoff event. So that's a great comment, Mark. I appreciate it.
Well,
Thanks, Fred.
we should also note that Pete Peterson is both on the MEC and said he would attend the planning group meeting. I think, Pete, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think at the last Board of Selectmen meeting, you talked about the priority areas that the town administrator would look into, and I'm still hoping that energy planning, climate planning will be part of that as well.
One thing on the building department, we never would have been able to get anyone from our building department to be on our committee, but their input was extremely valuable because for several of our buildings measures, they helped point out, unintended pitfalls that would have awaited us had we not consulted with them, and we made, small tweaks, still achieved the intent of the measures that we wanted to move forward, but without these kind of rookie mistakes that would have tripped us up later had we not consulted with them.
I think
Great. I see Jeanette has her hand up.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know how to make my face show, but other than the photo, but you can hear my voice, right?
Yep.
So I was wondering, listening to about Arlington and thinking in terms of transportation, Arlington, this I think is one significant difference between our two towns is you have fairly good access to public transportation,
Yeah.
right? And
Yep.
We have none. So I would think that the efforts for transportation with Medfield, and unless there's some kind of pie in the sky plan of having a bus that's going to go into Boston or something, which I would love actually. But it'll be focused on individual car owners, correct?
That's what it will have to be, yes. And
Yeah.
I actually feel very optimistic about it, because the way, and Jim was pointing that out, the way that the car industry is going, there is multi-billion, tens of billions of dollars being invested by each of these companies now to develop electric vehicles, and nobody is investing in combustion engines anymore. So on top of that, I think within a couple of years, we will see cars that are like the F-150 now, not only very competitive in the price, but in their features as well. Those 100,000 pre-orders that Ford received within a month of launching it speak to the quality of that car and the price too. I heard that together with the federal subsidies that you can get by buying this, it's a $33,000 truck that outstrips its equivalent with a gas combustion engine.
Mhm.
But I think also, Jeanette, we heard Hans say that, there are still plans developing, part of the, state's thinking is how do we reduce vehicle miles traveled? So, if we see, increased service on the rail lines in Walpole and Needham, let's say, and maybe the state will come up with a shuttle program that we could tap into to get to those stations. When I first moved here, I was working in Back Bay, and I would drive to either Norwood or Needham, and that was a real pain in the neck to do that.
Mhm.
But, definitely the state's in the early stages of those plans, and we'll definitely keep our eyes on what they come up with and see if there's something we can link into.
That would be very cool. And can I just ask one more question along transportation lines?
And then we'll go to Gus next.
Okay, for Ken, did Arlington make plans to have more charging stations for electric vehicles?
Yes, we did. That is, there are 2 or 3 measures actually within the plan that touch on that. And, the expectation is that the vast majority of people will charge their electric vehicles at home and some at work. The real challenge is finding a way for people who live in multi-unit buildings to charge electric vehicles, because often they don't have a driveway, they don't have a garage. There is no place where they have control over, a wall and can run conduit to it and put in their own personal charging station. So what do you do about that? And no one's found a perfect solution, but we essentially called out, the measure calls for us producing a separate plan about public access charging that will make it possible for those remaining 20 or 30% of people in Arlington who live in multifamily housing, whether it's condos or apartments or whatever, to feel confident that if they purchase an EV, they'll be able to charge it.
Okay, Gus, you want to go ahead?
Sure. Thanks, Fred. Ken, it was a quick question I had for you. In one of your early slides, when you were commenting about Arlington's ability to achieve net zero by 2050, you talked about the fact that there were some missing technology that has to be in place in order for you to be able to look at doing that. And I was just curious, thinking about it at a town level, what the technologies would be. I was just curious what technologies you'd identified that were the top of the list for what's missing now that you'd need to get there.
Yeah, well, an easy one that I think is going to fix itself is the range of electric vehicles available. Hilly was just talking about how great the Ford F-150 Lightning is. I mean, that's just coming out now. There are a lot of vehicles where consumer choice is not where it needs to be. People, it's frustrating to me. I have well-meaning, wonderful friends who are buying, gasoline vehicles now today because, the models that they feel that they really want for themselves or their families are not there yet. But electric vehicles are the future. I think we're going to get there. So that's an example of a technology that I'm confident is coming no matter what we do. Medfield and Arlington don't need to do a thing about that. These vehicles are coming. A place that I would say the biggest challenge in Arlington is older homes who heat with forced hot water. So, a hydronic distribution loop heated by either natural gas or oil. And if you have ductwork in your home for either forced hot air or even air conditioning, you can switch that over to a central electric heat pump, air source heat pump, pretty easily. If your heating system is forced hot water through pipes or steam, you can't do it very easily. You have to either put ductwork throughout your house at great expense, or you have to purchase ductless mini split heat pumps, where you have similarly a huge investment to put mini split heads in many zones, depending on the size of your house. So a great solution would be an air to water heat pump. That would be a drop-in solution. Just take out the old boiler, put in the new boiler. The new boiler is all electric, not electric resistance, but heat pump, air to water heat pump that produces hot enough water to either produce steam or at least hot water of a sufficient heat to be pumped through your radiators and keep your home warm. The problem is right now that air to water heat pumps cannot generate water that is hot enough. We're like 2/3 of the way there in temperature. They have to come up, there are teams of engineers working on this. They have air to water heat pumps that do this in Europe, but they have different kinds of radiators that were designed specifically for these air to water heat pumps in the first place. So they actually work. We have, all thousands and thousands and thousands of old homes with these old systems that only work if the water is, 180 degrees. And we can't get there. So that's an example. Once someone comes up with that and it's a drop-in solution, and it doesn't really cost that much more than an existing, gas or oil boiler, it'll be an absolute game changer. And it'll be, at that point, it'll just simply be about education or mandates, but we're probably not going to go there anytime soon. There'd be nothing stopping people from making their home all electric at no cost premium. Whereas right now, the cost premium for forced hot water system homes can be, unattainable.
Thanks.
Okay, I have a follow-up for you, Ken. It sort of relates to that question. It pertains to what I call the ramp, which is just on a numerical level. You're starting with the inventory that we have today, and we're ending up with net zero. What I mean by the ramp is whatever slope of a curve, this way actually going downward, that our carbon has to decrease by. And my question for you is there such a chart or a ramp in your report? And what can you say about it?
Yeah, it's a very good question. We debated it at length in the Clean Energy Future Committee. Should there be, essentially, should we have interim targets? Is it just net zero by 2050 and we'll get there as fast as we can? Or will we try to get to 50% by 2030 and 75% by 2040? Similar to what the state is doing. And we ultimately decided that we didn't want to do that. I'm trying to figure out how to really shorten this and encapsulate it. It's going to be very hard to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in a linear fashion. I think that there are certain projects and initiatives that Arlington needs to build up and put in place that will bear fruit later. They will appear to bear no fruit for years, and then suddenly there will be a bumper crop of fruit because a well thought out program that is finally funded comes into place, and then word spreads quickly, and suddenly everyone takes advantage of, electrifying their home. You know, that's within our control. I mentioned technology that's out of our control. Same thing with, you know, electric vehicles. There's, you know, estimates that by, you know, roughly 2025, starting around 2025, it'll become less expensive to buy. The upfront cost of buying an electric vehicle will be less expensive than a comparable fossil fuel vehicle. And of course, it's less expensive to own and operate an electric vehicle. So that's an inflection point after which we think that, you know, it'll become the dominant form of vehicle purchased. But we're not there yet. Today, the options aren't great, and the charging infrastructure is fairly woefully lacking, especially DC fast charging on highways, so people feel like they can, you know, go further than just a couple towns over on long trips. So we grappled with this as a committee and decided, you know, that just we were going to. The compromise is we decided we're going to push as hard and as fast as we can. We're not going to procrastinate and wait until 2045 and then start doing the hard things. But we acknowledge that there was just, we could pick some interim targets just to have them on paper, but they would be essentially meaningless. It's different. I feel, you know, I'm glad the state has set legally binding targets, because there are so many, you know, powerful interests pushing against real action on climate change. But within Arlington, you know, the will is already there. We're gonna move as fast as we can.
I want to comment.
Great question.
Yeah, so I want to add a comment. I think what Fred is asking about is a wedge tool where you can sort of model what happens if we have whatever 100 new electric vehicles versus 50 this year. And I know that ICLEI ClearPath has that as a pay-as-you-go tool that you can subscribe to. So we have no budget for that. But I know that Wellesley is a community that has ClearPath as a consultant. And I'm very interested to see how they're going to use it and what that looks like. And I know also that MAPC just received a grant to work with some communities to create a wedge tool for use in municipal use in Massachusetts. So that's going to be exciting once they finalize that.
Yeah. Yeah, we didn't do any of that kind of analysis. It was beyond our abilities and scope for the project. But I acknowledge it would be kind of interesting and helpful to run various scenarios and see what would get us to where we want to be. You know, these kind of like the state's 2050 roadmap that had the multiple pathways net zero.
Just one more question about that. I appreciate your patience with this. Are you doing something like tracking electric vehicles per year, you know, each year, how many there are new this year, next year, et cetera?
Yeah, not with that frequency, because we rely on data from MAPC, and MAPC in turn relies on data from the Registry of Motor Vehicles. And in fact, when we did our greenhouse gas inventory with a 2017 year in 2020, the most recent year for which data existed from MAPC that was, you know, of high enough quality to actually be reported was 2014. So the data, there's an issue with the data coming out of the RMV. I hope they can fix that. We intend to update our greenhouse gas inventory because the MAPC tool allows us to do that for free every 2 years. And so, you know, every 2 years, if there's been an update in vehicle data, that'll get incorporated. And you can, you know, it's a self-serve data entry tool when you use the MAPC tool, and there's a link to vehicle data for your town based on RMV data about vehicle registrations. And you can see right there how many EVs there are registered in town. And you can, if you want, you can download the spreadsheet and have a you know, a tracking tool. So we do intend to look at that and track it over time as part of the inventory. But I will just be honest that, and this is not to minimize these kind of analyses and tracking tools, but our focus is on creating the strongest program possible to get people to convert to EVs, and then look at how effective it is and how we can tweak it. But you know, every hour spent on building and, you know, conducting an analysis is an hour you're not convincing somebody to buy an EV and walking them through it. So it's, again, I don't want to minimize that, because if you don't measure things, how do you know if you're making, you know, progress? There's real value there, but I'm just telling you that the committee was laser focused on, you know, ramping up the highest impact campaigns and tools and programs possible as quickly as possible. And we'll kind of, you know, along the way, occasionally we'll stop and take a breath and measure things, but that was definitely, I'll admit it, not a high priority in this initial effort.
Good answer. I love it. And I'll just throw in that I think More EV, the state program, the More EV program, does have, that's the one exception, I think, to the data problem. They are keeping up to date month by month with the EV, you know, number of people in town you can count, or they count it on their website, who are getting the More EV rebate. I think that's how they keep it.
No, great point. Actually, that's a very good point. The data problem that we had 2014 was all vehicles, you know, but not just EVs, but More EV does track EVs strictly, and you can get that. It's a good point.
Yeah. Whereas everything else is a lag or very lagging problem. I appreciate that. Other questions? And Hilly, did we have another plan here other than me just fishing for more questions at this point?
No, I think there's one slide that I have that basically says join the MEA mailing list. I can just bring that up. So get involved, join the MEA mailing list. I think it's MEA medfield@gmail.com. You can also go to the website meamedfield.org. And again, look out for future events that the Energy Committee is putting on and announcements. Get involved, whether you're an energy geek or not, and let us know what you think, what your issues are, where you need help, or where you think we could do better. Thank you so much from me.
Well, thank you, Hilly, for putting this program together, and thank you, Jim, and thank you, Ken. And I want to thank, also making a special thank you to Helen, who did a lot of work on publicizing this event. So thank you, Helen. Thanks everybody for showing up tonight. And this is a great kickoff. Looking forward to working with you over the next months.
Best of luck to all of you.
Thank you.
Okay, good night.
Thank you. Night.